So I'm Dan Klepper, and I'm an artist based out of the Big Bend region of West Texas, in Marathon. I have a studio gallery there, and that's where I live. And I've been there for about 26 years. Foltz Fine Art has been representing my work here in Houston for 2016. Wow. And and so this is an exhibition that's in coordination with Houston Biennial FOTOFEST 2026. And so that's why the work is here. And the name of the show is called Wayfinder, Navigating the Natural Order. And it came about because I live out in West Texas, and I'm a big hiker. And I like to hike, I like to backpack, I like to kayak the river, and occasionally I'm on horseback. And so I started thinking about the ways that we move across the landscape, especially out west, because it's big country, and there's a lot of room to just to roam. And I started thinking about that in the context of how we move through that landscape, whether it's on foot or by canoe, and also like in dreams, and the way that we imagine ourselves moving through the landscape, and how that landscape inspires us or motivates us or changes us in some way, in the way and that and thinking about that, you also think about what are the signs that help us through the landscape, in the same way that we think about what are the signs that help us through life and make life decisions. And in hiking, you use cairns, little stacks of rocks that tell you which way to go. And on the river, you follow currents, or you avoid boulders, and that led me to start thinking about the kinds of signs and symbols and languages that we put together. I started to look for established vocabularies and symbols, and came across what was called the Hobo Code. And that was kind of the first foray into searching for signs that we use to move through the landscape. So the Hobo Code was used by hobos during the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. And then through the 1930s Depression, when a lot of people were out of work and they were moving west, across the frontier, through towns, mainly via the railroads. They would catch boxcars and go from place to place looking for jobs, hobos specifically. And they began to develop a code of symbols that they would make up, that they would mark on tree trunks and fence posts and sides of barns, that would tell other hobos you could, if you do some work here, you could get fed, or there's work available, or the farmer will let you sleep in the barn overnight. Friendly symbols that were helpful, but also other symbols that would tell you to get out of here, or this man has a gun, or you get cursed out here. It was one of them, or also where you could catch a boxcar, because a lot of during that period of time, railroads, and I'm assuming that they still do, they had deputies that would patrol the railroad, because there were a lot of people on these trains. You know, you don't see that now, but during the Depression, you would see boxcars, you know, with dozens of people on them, on top of them, between them, because they were, you know, it was the Depression and nobody had any work. And so the code would tell you, well, this is a good place to hop on because the deputies aren't around, you know, or they don't patrol, or they're friendly. So I thought that was interesting. So I created a series of 25 different monoprints that are hand painted and also photographs. And it was an interesting kind of foray into trying to reimagine what the past looked like for the present. And that meant going around Texas and looking for landscapes or buildings or scenes that still look like the period of time from the 1900s to 1930s. And remarkably, there's a lot of places that are like that. You know, I mean, in Texas, you know, some places it just hasn't changed that much. And so I would select these scenes and photograph them. And then I created a way to take the code, the symbols from the codes, and implant them into these scenes and make it look, you know, relatively authentic. Because the code itself still survives, but evidence of these codes, you know, gone. All of them were, you know, gone long ago because they were just so temporary and ephemeral. They were scratched into posts, or they used charcoal to draw them, and of course none of that lasts. So that kind of set me off on actually manifesting this idea of wayfinding and navigating and using the natural elements from the natural world as well as the, you know, the vocabularies and the languages and the symbols and codes that we invent or that we utilize, like using a star to navigate, or creating a zodiac in order to tell us what to do in our daily lives. That's kind of then led to other work that embraces those kinds of codes and languages and symbols, and that's how I ended up with the work in the show. Yeah, so this is the the second large installation based on the phases of the moon that we've done at Foltz, and it's 120 panels. It's a version of a print that I created earlier, and it's 120 photographs of the setting full moon during a lunar eclipse. And so this was photographed out in West Texas, south of Marathon, in the Santiago Mountains. And this is right before dawn. And so the full moon was not only a full lunar eclipse, but it was also what they call a blood moon, which and the lunar eclipse, the eclipse itself turns the moon this blood color because it's a shadow, you know, over the moon. But as the sun starts to rise, before, you know, it creates this ambient light that then changes the color of the sky, and it also changes the color of the setting moon. And so that's why you see it go from dark, you know, blood red to this kind of pale pink. I've included some new videos as well as an Android app that I created for the show. Early in my art career, my primary focus was experimental video, and I created a lot of experimental video, uh, dense, highly, saturated. It was kind of like psychedelic, hallucinogenic works using an analog video synthesizer called the Dan Sandine image processor that was created in Chicago by a video artist named Dan Sandine. And I started working in video right after, I guess, my last year at the University of North Texas. And it was new, it was something just completely different. I had shot photography my whole, my whole time through college, and I was looking for some way that was different and new and had motion and had more of a narrative opportunity to create a narrative other than just one still picture. And analog video came along, and there was an opportunity to study with a gentleman out of San Francisco who was a visiting artist named David Dow. And he had built and created this Dow video synthesizer. And at that time, everything was analog. Digital really wasn't there yet. And so you would take a video camera, like a surveillance camera, that the resolution for video at that point, unless you were in a TV studio, was pretty rudimentary. But you could take that signal and you could plug it into these little units that were video synthesizers, and each of the units would apply a different sine wave or a sawtooth wave, it would just kind of go, and that would influence the video signal. It would influence the image, and you could tune it, and then you could mix them together, and you could interrupt it. And so I learned how to do that, and I learned the technology behind that process. And then I created a portfolio and applied to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, who had this thriving, it was kind of a brand new media arts department, generative systems and sound and video. And they had the Dan Sandine image processor, which was quite a complex system. And so I learned how to work with that and created a lot of experimental videos, and had some representation and was able to be included in a lot of exhibitions in the U.S. and Europe as a consequence of being represented by the Video Data Bank out of Chicago. And I rocked along with that for a long time, and then kind of moved on to other forms of the creative process. It was, at that time, it was not something you could make a living at as an artist. It was highly experimental, and so, years and years and years later, now you're able to create video with your camera, with your digital camera, and the technology has changed completely. And at that time, we were learning how to program with BASIC. It was a very rudimentary computer language that's still used today. It's a if and language. If A equals X, then Y does this, and and now you can access software programming, in a lot of amazing, a lot of amazing ways. And the digital, not only digital photography, but digital video is just so much more high quality, and there's so much more you can do with it in your studio as opposed to working professionally in a video studio, which is what we used to have to do in order to edit our videotapes, and we'd have to go into a real studio and do it, and that was, it was expensive, and everybody worked using grant money, and it was just a very different environment than today. So I thought, well, for this show, maybe I'll return to do a little bit of video, and so I've done a number of video loops by going out and just shooting some particular event. My favorite of what I have is a video loop of just dragonflies over the river. They're just hundreds of them, and they're just kind of swarming in slow motion. And then I was asked by the Princeton Drawings curator of the Princeton Drawings curator. This was several years ago. Lyle Williams, he was the Princeton Drawings curator at the McNay Museum in San Antonio. He was putting together a show from a collection of a collector in San Antonio, and the collector had the collection was predominantly Donald Judd and Agnes Martin and Jasper Johns, and so the curator put together this show of work from these artists that referenced West Texas and referenced, the idea of this big, open space and how it inspires these artists, and in this very minimalist way. And the curator asked me to create a piece of video art that in some way gave people a sense of what that West Texas felt like and looked like. And so I created this video in which I drew by using a moving train intermixed with a dust devil moving across the landscape. I created a line. Drew a line across the terrain, a straight line, and so that was kind of my first return to creating videos. So that's in this show too. It's called Untitled Transient Line, and it's kind of trippy to watch. It's kind of a hallucination, and what I wanted the Wayfinder show to do is to kind of span a century in some way, and or more, and that the signs and symbols and the codes that we use 100 years ago and reflect the signs and symbols and codes that we use today. And so I wanted to create an Android app for a tablet that that allows the viewer to interact with a machine. And so I created this app that listens to what you're saying, and then depending on how close you are to the tablet's microphone, the machine will dictate what you're saying precisely, but the farther away from the microphone you get, it begins to misunderstand what you say, or it approximates what you say. and therefore that machine becomes more human-like because we do the same thing. We're always mishearing, everybody that we talk to, depending on how much we're paying attention and how much we hear. And I thought that was funny. I thought it was interesting and it was funny, and how you just, with the simplest thing, you can take a machine and make it more human in what you say. And but I wanted the machine to be able to not only reflect back what you were saying in a very human way, but I also wanted it to be able to interpret what you're saying as a translator for other machines. And so as you're talking into to the tablet or the machine, and it's listening to you and it's transcribing what it thinks you're saying, it also translates what you're saying into emojis, which is literally the language between machines and humans that we've developed. But I didn't want it to be a literal translation. I wanted it to be more interpretive. So I programmed it so when it hears a concept like a storm or walking or the seashore, then whatever it's that arrives, it arises in the context. Then it chooses the emoji that is more poetic as opposed to literal. So you don't always get exactly what you're saying in the way that it's very much similar to the way that you send emojis to friends in your texts. And then lastly, the machine then translates what you're saying into binary code, which is basically the way that all machines talk to each other. And so that's what that piece is about. It's a beautiful place to live in, and when I decided to move there, I was fortunate enough to be able to make a living and kind of live where I wanted to, and that had been the case for a long time. In addition to the artwork, before I really was able to live solely off the artwork that I do. I did a lot of freelance work, and so it just really didn't matter where I lived. And since I was in Texas, I was born and raised in South Texas, but I had left for a long time and then returned much later. And I decided that I wanted to live in a place that every day that it inspired me, that the landscape inspired me, and that was my criteria. And I wanted to be able to look out the window and feel like no matter how difficult life was going to be in every other aspect of my life, I wanted to be able to look out the window and see something that was inspiring and beautiful. And I was determined to stay in Texas, and so the Big Bend, was really the place that did that for me. And people are always surprised when they come out to the Big Bend, because even if they were born and raised in Texas, they don't realize that it's completely different than all the rest of the state. I mean, there are mountains. It's high desert mountains. It's not like the Rockies, but and it's really wild and unpopulated. And you have these huge vistas that you're able to witness the kinds of things that happen in nature, all the way from the top of the sky to the land in front of you, and the terrain, and that's something that's really remarkable. If you're there, everybody who's gone out there has a story that they come back with about how they're overwhelmed at times by what they what they see nature doing and what they see the weather doing, or the wildlife, or just the skies. And everybody that I've ever met that has gone out there and come back to wherever they live in Texas or elsewhere, and they all have a story that they talk about that literally changes who they are. They even say this really changed me. So to visit there is one thing, but to live in it, to live in it every day and see it every day, it's such an incredible opportunity to just witness how the planet works, and to me that's more valuable than convenience or access to all of the human-made things that we have on hand. So.